Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another 2024 election related video. Today I'm going to be releasing my updated prediction for the 2024 presidential election in the most likely matchup that seems all but inevitable at this point, aside from a couple of outstanding factors that could potentially change the nominees for the Democratic and Republican parties. And that matchup that is most likely to occur is between incumbent Democratic President Joe Biden and former Republican President Donald Trump. And this has been expected, I think, for a while. I think ever since the 2020 election and Trump's refusal to concede and the special circumstances under which the events that followed the 2020 election. I think a lot of people expected him to run for president, myself included, and Trump to run for president. Biden was less of a sure thing. He was older. He is the oldest president in American history, and like Trump and many other presidents before him, he is not very popular. Joe Biden right now is especially unpopular with according to 538's polling average, he has a disapproval of 55% and an approval of 39%. This is not the worst point that his approval rating has been in his presidency, but it is fairly low. I think Biden has been underwater for more than 2 years now, ever since his honeymoon period, as they say, ended in late August of 2021. But ever since then, Joe Biden has gone from being I think his worst point was July of last year, where he was at an 18-point disapproval rating here in early July of 2022. But he's been underwater, and there have been high and low points in this underwater, you know, period that is likely to last. But right now, recently it's been getting worse, and the public and the media have really been focusing on the presidential polling as the primary seasons begin for the Democrats and Republicans. It's more so important for the Republicans since Biden seems all but assured the Democratic nomination. Um, Although you can make the same case for Trump when you look at the polling. But for the general election, Joe Biden's numbers against Donald Trump have not been great. Now, what I will say is the polls are not everything that we rely on, and I have very strong opinions on a lot of these polls, especially after they overestimated Republicans in 2022, and they appear likely. And I think another thing that needs to be pointed out is that these polls that are measuring Biden versus Trump nationally, the presidential election is decided by the Electoral College in all respects, but that is influenced by the popular vote winners in every state, which influences the electoral votes, or which candidate gets that state's electoral votes. Um, and so when Trump won in 2016, as many of you know, um, he did not win the popular vote, but he was able to win enough swing states, the overwhelming majority of swing states, rather, that even though Hillary Clinton won by, I think it was 2 points nationally, let's look. Yeah, she got 48% of the popular vote. Trump got 46%. Trump was, it was Clinton didn't do well enough in these swing states and lost too many of them to win the Electoral College. And in 2020, we went back to the status quo of the popular vote winner, the presidential candidate who won the popular vote being elected president with Joe Biden. He won the popular vote by about 5 points, I want to say, 4.5. Yeah, 4.5 points against Trump. And he was able to win with basically by the same margin the Electoral College, 306 to 232. Not a massive margin by any means, but relatively pretty comfortable. But a lot of Biden's victory really rested on a lot of these swing states, like Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. And that is true in most national elections. In this day and age, we're a very polarized nation, and I think it makes sense why these polls would be showing such close results, even in the popular vote. But I also think that it's important to take a note, to remind ourselves of how well Democrats have done, or which party has been, um, rather, doing well, performing well in special elections and in off-year election cycles, and also in last year's midterms, which were unusually, historically pretty good for the incumbent party, the president's, or the party of the incumbent president, which was, the Democrats, because Joe Biden was in the White House and is still in the White House. So I think that that's something to consider, and I also think the polling data from last year, while for a long time polls were underestimating Republicans, it seems that it's kind of it's kind of that overestimation has kind of or underestimation has kind of been more in the Democrats' favor as of late. Now, I'm not here to necessarily say that the polls aren't showing, or the polls don't mean that Biden has any issues, because the polls do show that there's a lot of concerns for Biden, whether it be his age. He's now 81 years old. He'll be 82. A few weeks after the 2024 election. Donald Trump, on the other hand, while he is no spring chicken himself, I think the age issue is less of a concern to many voters for him because he is seen as more energetic. But Trump also faces a lot of baggage from his efforts to overturn the election, the 2020 election, and also his rhetoric, and which it turns off a lot of independent voters. So what I would say here is that even though Trump has like a better, I would say, favorability rating, which has been tracked since the end of his presidency. It's not an approval rating because he's no longer the incumbent president. Um, but he's disapproved of by 11 points, which again is not good. But on the surface, you'd say, okay, well, that looks pretty good for Trump when you compare it to Biden. But I think another thing to consider is that independents and Democrats, on the very progressive wing, in the very progressive wing of the Democratic Party are not very happy with Joe Biden, and he is struggling with young voters. So overall, I think there's merit to say that both candidates have a fighting chance at 2024, and I've never really thought otherwise. I always thought even after the 2022 midterms, when it looked pretty good for Biden's reelection prospects looked pretty good, I said don't count Trump out. And now it seems like the opposite is happening, and many people, including a lot of Democrats, are counting Biden out. But I would say this is going to be a very close election, and I'm not going to waste any time and just start filling out the safe states for both candidates. So these states will be decided by over 15 percentage points, or 15 percentage points or higher, however you want to put it. They're basically guaranteed for the incumbent party. Some of the likely states will also be basically bordering on safe. Kansas, I will add to the safe column, although I'm uncertain. I think that overall it's going to be the same margin as it was in 2020. Um, you know, basically, I kind of have made a rule for myself where if the state is like 14 point, the margin for a party or a candidate, um, in a state is like 14.9, that basically, even though it's technically still a likely margin, that basically I'd round it up to safe. And in Kansas, I do think that Trump will have a pretty similar result here. Technically, this was a likely margin in 2020, and it is a relatively a left trending state. I don't think Trump's going to do very well in the Kansas City suburbs and a lot of the urban population centers, but it's a red state. It's been a red state for a very long time. I don't think that that's really going to change. Colorado also was a likely state in 2020. This state has been getting a lot of attention recently for its ruling, I think, on it was Tuesday, where the Colorado Supreme Court said that Donald Trump, because they concluded that he had committed an insurrection um, in regards to the January 6th Capitol riot, would be could be, or what was by sorry, what I'm trying to say is that because of the clause in the 14th Amendment which bars insurrectionists, or bars people who uh, participate in insurrection against the United States from holding federal office or public office, um, that Trump could be disqualified from the ballot in Colorado, and in from Colorado in both the general election ballot and the primary ballot. But Colorado is already a very left trending state. Even last year, Michael Bennet won his Senate race against a moderate Republican by a bigger margin than Biden defeated Trump in the state by. Um, Overall, I don't think that this really was a partisan move. I think that a lot of Republicans and some people are saying that it is, but overall, Colorado is a very left trending state. I have no doubt in my mind that no matter what happens in 2024, Joe Biden will carry it. Maybe it's a likely margin, but either way. So we'll start with some of the likely states that are basically close enough to being, they're pretty close to safe or have realistically no shot of going to the other side. I would say you know, it's a big the likely margin ranges it ranges from 5% margin to a 15% margin. So a lot of these states will be closer to being, competitive. In fact, some of them kind of are competitive, um, while others are pretty close to safe. I would say that Oregon, New Mexico, and Maine are pretty solidly, um, pun intended, likely Democratic. I think Joe Biden's going to do very well in these states. I think Oregon, while it was a 16-point margin for him, it has shown signs of it's not. It doesn't have the most. If you look back at 2000 and 2004, it was a pretty close state. Obama did pretty well there. Clinton did not do very well there, but she, however, did. She only got 50% of the vote, likely because there were some of the vote was taken by third party candidates, or some of the more progressive vote was siphoned off from her by third party candidates like Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. Um, I think that also, when you look at the election results in Oregon last year, they were not very great for Democrats. I think to some extent that was due to the governor's race, like the Republicans doing very well there, and I know governor races don't necessarily have an impact on federal races, but it did seem to help Republicans win a House seat there, a competitive House seat where there was a progressive Democrat, and also Ron Wyden, who has had a very strong history of winning, or has a history of winning by very large margins, only won by 15 points against a QAnon conspiracy theorist. That might part of the margin might have also been third party candidates, as you can see right here. I don't know who those other two guys are, but either way, I think Biden wins the state by a similar margin to Wyden. New Mexico, Biden won by 11 points. I think it stays in that range. Maine, this is really the only one that I guess there's a snowball's chance in hell that or you could give Trump like a snowball's chance in hell of winning Maine, but like at large, that is the second congressional district will actually get out of the way now. That is very much going to go to Trump, who voted for him by 7 in 2020. Probably going to be like a 10-point margin this time around. It's very rural, very white working class. Used to be, it has a Democratic representative, Jared Golden, who's pretty moderate. He's probably going to get reelected next year. Um, but I think that overall, this is a very Trumpy district. It has it's interesting. Um, so yeah, I think that's where we'd stand on Maine. Um, I think Trump came close to winning it in 2016, but I think even if Biden does lose in 2024, which is a possibility, I'm trying not to give away my prediction um, overall. But I think yeah, I think no matter how bad it gets for Biden in 2016, I have a hard time seeing how he could get Hillary Clinton numbers in states like Maine or Minnesota. I think you could see reductions in some of his margins from 2020. Um, I think that's very reasonable to assume, especially based on the polling, which again, I'm not the biggest believer in every poll, and you can call me biased towards Democrats, but either way, I think that that's how Maine would go. Nebraska's first. This got bluer in redistricting. It was a 14.9 victory in 2020. If it were the same district, I would put it in the safe column, but it's kind of left trending, not super left trending. Nebraska, too, is more so the swing seat in Nebraska, or swing congressional seat, has a Republican incumbent, Don Bacon, who's going to have a very interesting reelection campaign next year. Um, it got like a tad bit. This district got a tad bit redder in redistricting by like 0.2%, but overall, I think Biden is a pretty good candidate here and Trump is not. So overall, as I've, been trying to kind of say, oh, and New Jersey is also very much I'm going to go Democratic. I just think it'll be kind of close, or kind of close, not really. 14-point margin. But yeah, I think the main takeaway, as I've been saying from the beginning of the videos, I don't necessarily think that Biden has ever been a very strong candidate for the Democrats. I think his appeal in 2020, um, was, and this is kind of, I'm just kind of getting my thoughts together here. I was thinking about this when I read an article yesterday from Politico, um, and just kind of thinking about how I agreed with this one person who said that Biden really had an appeal in the Democratic primary in 2020 because the moderate Dems were able to coalesce around or coalesce against Bernie Sanders if they all backed Biden. And also, Biden made the argument that he was the centrist, experienced candidate who would be a transitional president and was the only one who could beat Trump. So I think that there were, you know, reasons to Biden's success in 2020, and he'll have a bigger victory in the primary in 2024. I'm not concerned about that. Um, by any means. Dean Phillips should not be running against him. Really, he's going to doom his own political career. But of course, uh, no, I'm not, I won't. I'll get away from that bit. But I think what I was trying to say before I got all distracted was Biden and Trump are both not. A Biden Trump rematch is something that a lot of people don't want, but it's, myself included, quite honestly, because we've already gone through it. But I think that it is all but inevitable, and I think that in the end, both candidates kind of drag each other down. You might see Joe Biden's numbers doing very poorly, but Donald Trump's are also very bad, and vice versa. I think that both candidates benefit from the other being weak in certain areas. Iowa and Ohio, these are two states also that Trump won by pretty strong margins. Um, in the past two election cycles, he turned them from pretty close battleground states. Ohio and Iowa were pretty much bellwethers and turned them into pretty Republican states. Ohio does have an interesting Senate race next year with Sherrod Brown. There's potential that I think his reelection campaign depends somewhat on how badly Biden performs in the state. I think right now Trump's set to win Ohio by like 10 points. So I think that that's really bad for Brown. I think to win, Biden would have to hold Trump to like an 8 point margin in the state. Iowa, not no Senate race here next year. Interesting House races, but overall, I think Trump's set to win it by similar margins. They both went to Trump by 8 points in 2020, but I think they'll both go into the low double digits this time. Iowa probably be maybe a point or two better. South Carolina also, this one could be safe depending on how badly Joe Biden performs with turning out the black vote, especially in these southern states, and we'll talk about that more when we get to Georgia. I think right now, just considering that Hillary Clinton was not a great candidate for black voters in 2016 and still was able to keep Trump under 15. I know I said my whole round when we were talking about Kansas, I put my whole rounding rule in about rounding to 15%, but I think also Democrats putting the South Carolina primary or attempting to at least make it their first primary might energize some black voters in the state and help them come out against or for Joe Biden. So yeah, in Alaska also, this was a semi-close state in 2020. 10-point victory for Trump, not great, considering Alaska's ruby red history. I mean, just go back and look, 2008, 2004, 2000. Um, but I think that overall it stays around the same margin. You know, Democrats have a good incumbent there for the House election with Mary Peltola, but um, she's not going to carry Biden over the top, by any means. Florida also, this is a red state. Nowadays, it's Republican leaning swing state. I wouldn't call it safe red. I think last year's elections really made it seem like Florida just absolutely cannot go to Democrats. And to some extent, I think that's true. But I think it's not going to be a blowout like a 20-point victory for. It's not, it's not going to be like how DeSantis won by 20 points in his governor's race. I think Trump's set to win Florida by maybe 7 to 8 points, maybe a little bit more. Um, but he's going to do, Florida's a state where Democrats have really, really been struggling with the Hispanic vote, like especially in the Hispanic community and electorate varies from state to state. Obviously, it's not a big tent group, and I think, that is something that needs to be acknowledged. But in Florida, the Cuban vote has been very, very good for Trump in and for the GOP in the last couple election cycles. So I think, yeah, that's where I put Florida right now. Pretty solid victory for Trump, because it did shift to the right from 2016 to 2020. It was one of the few states that Trump did better in margin wise. Texas, Actually, Texas, I can't remember if I had. No, I think I'm gonna keep it in lean. Um, I just gave away that state, but we still have to go for Virginia, New Hampshire, and Minnesota. We'll go for these pretty quickly. Minnesota and Virginia, I think these are two states the Biden won by pretty comfortable margins in 2016. Hillary Clinton did not do very well in Minnesota, which I think was somewhat due to vote splitting with third parties. She didn't do great in Virginia either, despite having Tim Kaine, who is a senator from the state and was at the time, um, as her vice presidential or as her vice presidential pick. But still, I think Virginia, the Nova suburbs overall, shifting left. Republicans have seen success here, as shown in 2021, but it's a governor's race again, and I think that that's kind of 2021 was a special kind of year. I think Democrats or Terry McAuliffe made a lot of missteps, and Democrats and Republicans in general found a very decent candidate. I don't think Trump is the candidate to make Virginia super close. Hypothetically, he could get it down to single digits, but I think Virginia actually does stay around where it is right now. I think the Nova suburbs do shift left. So maybe it could be like an 11 or 12 point victory for Biden. Minnesota could be a little bit closer. The rural areas are getting redder and redder, although um, Minnesota Democrats somehow find a way to balance winning over their progressive voter base in the Minneapolis metro area while also, keeping some some more traditional, socially conservative Democrats in the rural areas to vote for them. So I think Minnesota stays around the same margin. I could see it narrowing up by a little bit though, but has a very blue history. New Hampshire is another state where, despite the poll, this is actually one of the few states where polling, at least it's one of the few swing states, rather, where polling has not been terrible for Joe Biden. He's actually been doing pretty well against most candidates except for Nikki Haley, which I think makes sense. Nikki Haley's been, as the second place candidate in the New Hampshire primary, been doing very, very well. She recently earned Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire's endorsement. And we'll talk about that when I make my video on the early primary states, which will probably be in the next couple of days. Yeah, I think Biden, I don't think he wins by 10. I honestly think that's a bit much. But yeah, New Hampshire was another state where Republicans were overestimated last year. I think Biden wins the state by 7 to 8. I think Trump's um, impressive performance in New Hampshire in 2016, it wasn't necessarily unexpected. I think walking into election day, that last week, if you look at the polling, the last week before the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton was having a lot of trouble in New Hampshire, I think. Before then, she was doing pretty well, and then Trump started to lead in the state again. So that was one of her last minute campaign stops. But I think ever since Trump has, called New Hampshire like a drug, I think he called it like a drug infested hellhole. And I think New Hampshire overall not very appreciative of the Trump type of Republican, which I think was even proven further with the 2022 congressional elections there. So I think New Hampshire stays around the same margin for Joe Biden. Um, so then we get down to so Biden right now has 226 electoral votes. Donald Trump has 179, and we are going into these seven or six states, I guess, or these are the states where I think either party has like a pretty reasonable chance at victory. I don't know though, because Texas, I'm kind of debating here whether or not I should make Texas likely red because looking at the polling, some accurate pollsters like YouGov um, was showing it being like Trump +8. I don't think that it's going to. Yeah, you know what? We're gonna put Texas as likely red. I'm changing my mind, but barely. It'll be like the same as as a Trump's 5 point margin. I do think the suburbs overall and most of the urban areas like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston, Austin, San Antonio will shift left. I don't think that. I think that part of the thing for um, part of the reason why the shifts in the suburbs of Texas um, were like less they were less pronounced. The hold on. I think the shifts in between 2016 and 2020 in the Texas or like urban centers was, I think they were less pronounced because um, Trump was the same candidate both times, and I think Hillary Clinton wasn't, she wasn't like she was a bad candidate for the Rust Belt, and I think generally was a pretty weak candidate overall. But I think that in Texas, and in states like Arizona and Georgia, these three all shifted to the left margin wise from 2012 to 2016. Like Romney won Texas by 16, Trump won it by 9. Biden did pretty well there compared to Hillary, but still he lost it by 5.5. I think that a similar thing happens this time. It could be lean. I think the Senate race will be lean. I think Ted Cruz will underperform Trump. Colin Allred's a pretty good candidate for that race. But yeah, I think, as I was saying, you know, that these are the remaining states that I think both parties have a pretty reasonable shot at winning. I don't think I would say Biden has a reasonable shot at Texas. I think maybe in a landslide. I don't think it's out of the cards yet, but and if there were one presidential candidate that he could beat here, of the three that I think are most likely to win the nomination, Trump, DeSantis, and Haley. I think the only one who could, I think the easiest matchup where he could win, where Biden could win Texas would be against Trump. But again, I still think it'll go to Trump by like 5 points, just barely a likely margin. Okay, so these states, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, these were all very close in the last election, and most of these states are seeing pretty bad polling for Joe Biden. Now, I do think that to some extent we can't necessarily just look at polling. I mean, obviously, the polls are not everything, and I think to some extent we have to look at the polling history or the history of inaccuracies in these polls in some of these states. I think that's especially true for a state like Nevada, where and Arizona to some extent. But We're gonna go from east to west with these lean to tilt states. Um, I guess should I go over you guys probably know the margins of victory for Nevada or for Nevada for lean and tilt, but lean is basically it's when we're getting into the competitive states. It's a margin of 1 to 5 points, and tilt is below 1 point. Although again, I'm not a I'm not super exact about some of these states, or these are very close by exact. I mean like with margin, but which is why I might say a state goes to a candidate by a point, but say that it's tilt just to be safe. But overall, I'm just stumbling all over my words, and this video is getting too long. So we're going to start with Nevada. The polling here looks very bad for Biden, but Nevada polls always overestimate Republicans. And I think that overall, Democrats have a winning coalition that has managed to bail them out of several election cycles where you would have thought that they'd have lost. Like 2022, while they did lose the governor's race, they were able to hold on to all three House seats. I think that this initially, a lot of people seemed, or initially, I kind of thought that Nevada wasn't necessarily a gerrymandered map for the Democrats. Um, but in retrospect, I mean, Republicans, I think, won the House popular vote here by like, yeah, 3.5 points. So, and they didn't win any of the competitive seats, and they did lose the Senate race barely, with a more favorable electorate. So, I think Nevada has proven to be winnable for Republicans. It's just so stubbornly Democratic that I don't think that it's worth, I think Trump has a chance here, but the governor's races are different from Senate races, and I do think that or from federal races. This is presidential, but yeah, the Senate is federal at the same time. Just to be exact here. But I think Nevada goes to Biden by a point. I think Democrats have real concern. I think Democrats should be concerned about Hispanic voters and like the white working class Hispanics in Clark County and Vegas. They need to be concerned about Hispanics all over the country, but I think in Nevada, um, you know, that's a state where they've proven to be pretty reliably Democratic, as they have in many other states. But I think it really does look like Democrats just it's not a good idea. It's not a good play to bet on Republicans in Nevada because they always seem to screw it up. at some time. We'll see what John Ralston says here on Election Day 2024 if he puts it as a Trump victory. But again, he was wrong about some race, one House race last year in Nevada, so he's not perfect, but he did get both of the statewide races correct. So I think Nevada narrowly votes for Biden by like a point. I think Clark County shifts a little to the right. Maybe Washoe County gets a little bit bluer. Arizona, I am going to also give to Biden. This is another state where Democrats have been underestimated by polling in the past, as proven by 2022 and 2018. Um, but I think overall Trump is just such a bad candidate for Arizona. I think he'll keep it close. Even Carrie Lake, who was an awful candidate, who again was up against a not the best Democratic candidate in Katie Hobbs. I don't think she was terrible, like some people say. She was a statewide elected official, but she didn't run a good campaign. So, but either way, I think Trump just is so toxic to the Arizona suburbs. I think that this is really just a state where he's just really shows his his weakness with suburban voters and moderate moderate voters. I think Biden, um, despite his unpopularity here, I think also Hispanic turnout does matter with Arizona. I will say that if Biden bombs with Latino turnout, that will definitely give Trump a lane here, and he has a lane anyway. But I think it'll be close. Won't be a 5 point victory. Won't be like a 2 or 3 point victory like I might have thought a couple months ago. But I think overall Trump's just so toxic to it in a state like Arizona that I really can't see him winning it as of right now, or at least I don't bet on him winning it as of right now. Georgia, though, I am going to give to Trump. And this is something, this is not necessarily, I understand that Georgia is another state where Trump is a pretty bad candidate. He has a court case, or one of his indictments is focused on his efforts to overturn the election here. But Biden has just had, the polls in Georgia, on the other hand, are pretty accurate. And while Biden, I think some of his low numbers can be attributed to like unenthusiastic Democrats who don't want to say that they're going to back Biden, but overall will probably show up and vote for him. Of course, that's not a risk the Democrats should be willing to take, but I think the black vote in Georgia is going to obviously back Joe Biden. I think a lot of these polls that show Trump and even some that showed Herschel Walker winning the Senate race last year showed Republicans doing very well with the black vote. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that there is a good chance that Biden just is not able to energize the black vote or the African American voters that are crucial to Democratic victories in the state of Georgia. They are basically their base, because of course, yes, Democrats have made inroads with, working class or with new or recent like people who have recently moved to the state of Georgia, maybe from the Midwest or from California or wherever, any of the big states where that are declining in population, and maybe more they have Democrats have like gained with white educated voters, but without black voters, they basically have no chance of winning Georgia. And I don't think that Georgia's doomed for Biden, as some people say, but I do think that right now Trump, just based on Biden's weakness with a lot of college town voters and just or a lot of young voters, who are mainly who are most of whom are like packed into college towns like the University of Georgia and Athens, or some maybe some black voters in Atlanta. That's the Atlanta area is a very integral to Biden was a very integral to Biden's victory here. So I do think that that weakness right now leads me to believe that Trump will be able to take advantage of that and win the state overall, despite his weakness overall with the suburban vote. And just I think Biden's right now is, if I had to give one of these states for Trump to flip, it would be Georgia. North Carolina also, this is a state where Biden got a lot of hype a couple months ago. That's kind of died down as his numbers have gotten worse. I think he loses it by like 2 points. It's, a state where Democrats consistently perform well, but just, it's like Nevada. It's very, very hard for them to get over that hump of 2 to 3% and be able to win the state. And I think that Trump, while he might do worse in some of the suburban areas and some of the urban areas like Charlotte, um, and Raleigh and Greensboro. I just think he's not going to. I think Biden's just going to have a hard time, especially if black turnout decreases in this northeastern district um, relative to 2020, but or relative to what it was in 2020. That could present a problem for him. Um, it's already a right trending area, this North Carolina one district, and that'll be tough for Don Davis next year, especially under the new maps. So yeah, that is where I would put North Carolina right now. 2 to 3 point victory for Trump. Um, Probably I'd say a solid 2 point victory. Wisconsin, I would also give to Trump, and this puts him at 261 electoral votes. I think Wisconsin has, ironically, been one of the better states for Biden in terms of polling, but it's having Biden performing polling better in Wisconsin than Michigan is pretty crazy to think about. Um, and we'll talk about that in just a second with Michigan. But I think that Trump overall, he's one. I think this is one of the states where he's really You're going to see him really tap into the white working class vote, and like in Ohio and Iowa. And I think that Biden is not going to do well enough with turning out young voters and just even Mandela Barnes made gains in Dane and Milwaukee counties, and wasn't able to overcome Ron Johnson, who is a proven winner despite his awful approval rating, which is kind of an inverse argument you could make for is kind of the same argument I'm making for Joe Biden in 2024, is that he could still win despite his terrible approval rating. But I think in Wisconsin, this is a state where right now I put my money on Trump, even though he's awful in the WoW counties. I think he'll make pretty substantial improvements in the driftless area, this southwestern part of Wisconsin. And I think in the rural areas he'll continue to build, and Biden won't be able to overcome that with his margins in the urban areas. So I think Trump wins Wisconsin by um, the skin of his teeth. Michigan also, this is another state where I think Democrats have really been panicking, but the Republican Party in Michigan has seen so many bad election cycles. And it's just hard for me to see how Trump is favored in Michigan as of right now. He could win it, obviously, but you can see here some of the polls like pop out more. Some of the polls in Trump's leads pop out more than they do in Wisconsin. So I think overall, right now, Biden is going to, if black turnout, collapses in Detroit, that could prove to be a problem for Biden. Absolutely, it would be a problem, and I think that that could honestly give the state to Trump, as it likely was a factor in Trump's victory there in 2016. But I think right now Michigan stays around a Biden +2 victory. I think he does well enough in Grand Rapids and Lansing, and does all right in the Oakland, or in the Detroit suburbs, and probably does worse at the moment in the white working class areas like Detroit. I was gonna say it. Saginaw, um, Macomb. What are some of the other ones? I can't think. Flint. Yeah, some of those counties I think will shift towards Trump. So overall, I think Michigan stays around the same margin for Biden, 2 to 3 point victory. And then we get down to Pennsylvania. Biden's at 258 electoral votes, Trump's at 261. So Pennsylvania, like in 2020, will decide the election. Although, Pennsylvania was not the last state to be called. If it was, it wouldn't have been the one that declared Biden being the victor, but it was the state that put him over the top. Um, when you arrange the states by the order in which they were which were called first. So Pennsylvania, I do think right now is very close. I think that Trump has a lane to victory here. Biden has a lane to victory. This is a very polarized state. It was especially important in the Senate elections last year, and in the House elections, and Democrats saw success. And the polling here for Trump is not as good as it is in some of the Sun Belt states and in Michigan. And again, Pennsylvania will vote to the right of Michigan. That has been proven by multiple election cycles. You can't really change my mind unless you want to bring up the governor race maybe last year. But that was under different circumstances. Governor races are weird. But I think Trump overall has strengths with the white working class and with will probably cut into Biden's margin in Lackawanna County with Scranton. I think Biden, on the other hand, will continue to improve in the Philly suburbs. The black turnout in Philadelphia will really be probably his greatest hurdle to overcome because if it's bad, Trump is probably favored here, and that would give him the presidency. But Biden doing well in Pittsburgh and the Philadelphia suburbs and some other counties, and also doing okay in Harrisburg, which is trending left. If he can do all that and maintain and like maintain a like an appropriate floor in Philadelphia County, I think, which I do think is what's going to happen, he will win the state, in my opinion. And I think that right now he is favored to win Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes, and that puts him over the top at 277 electoral votes. So right now, I do think, despite the polling, despite the abysmal polling for Joe Biden, I do think that he is right now a narrow favorite to win re-election against Donald Trump. This is a very close election. If you disagree with me, that is absolutely okay. My opinion is not fact. Um, and I'm very confident this will not be my final prediction. But right now, I do think that even if Biden does lose the election, I find it hard to believe that he'll win the popular vote. Like the way that these polls are measuring, the way to measure a presidential election is so weird because you know Biden, I think was a pretty clear favorite in 2020 in terms of the popular vote. People still doubted him, of course, because of the way that the media portrayed the 2016 election uh, as expected to be that because many people because of the media expected it to be a Hillary Clinton landslide, even though the polling wasn't really backing that up. It was still showing her as a favorite, but anyways, I think that one error in the media's portrayal of Donald Trump has really made Democrats panic about 2020 and 2024. But overall, I think that if they maintain their status as of right now, I do believe that they will win the election. And I don't think Biden needs to necessarily have a great approval rating to win the election because in 2022 and in 2023, his approval rating was pretty bad. It was better than where it is now, but it was still very, very bad. And Democrats were able to hold Republicans or give Republicans a run for their money, which will be important in the House and Senate elections, especially the House elections, which look right now better for Democrats than the Republicans. So I think right now, um, you know, Biden is the narrow favorite. I think that this is going to be an ultra competitive election cycle. I'll make some matchups later for Biden versus DeSantis, Biden versus Haley, but this video's gone on long enough. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think Trump right now is the favorite to beat Biden, as most of the polls are suggesting, or do you agree with me and think that Biden is still narrowly favored against Trump? Let me know down in the comments below. And before you go, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, check out some of my other content, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.